Hey, it's Lou, and here's the thing. Get a job, find a spouse, have a kid. That's long been the traditional pathway towards home ownership in America. But not for millennials. The generation is delaying or foregoing marriage and child rearing. No surprise then that the US home ownership rate among millennials is significantly lower than it was for previous generations at the same age. Part of this is preference. Millennials value flexibility and city living, which tends to be prohibitively expensive if you're looking to buy a home. But the Great Recession is also to blame. So is student debt and political gridlock. So, will the millennials stuck in the rental market ever break out of it? Is it a big deal if they don't? And how are millennials changing what American homes look like? As is often the case with discourse about millennials, our historically low rate of home ownership is frequently framed as a preference, as if we're all content apartment hopping, living alone, and swiping right on Tinder over and over again. The theory seems to be that millennials will never move away from the urban cafes that sell avocado toast or the city center food halls with craft beer on tap. A study examining the way home builders are targeting millennials in Houston and Phoenix underscore these perceptions. New units are popping up in walkable neighborhoods that are close to public transportation, restaurants, and things like local taverns and speakeasies. The report also highlights socially conscious construction elements like solar electricity. One builder in Phoenix commissioned a mural in order to target young buyers. Others have focused on connected apartments with high-speed internet. Likewise, an article in a real estate trade magazine asserts that developers in Las Vegas are attracting young buyers by building concierge-style apartment complexes that have movie theaters, dog grooming areas, and plug-in stations for electric cars. Deirdre Pfeiffer, an associate professor in the School of Geographical Sciences and Urban Planning at Arizona State University and a co-author of the aforementioned study of Houston and Phoenix, told me the builders she interviewed believe that millennials want authentic homes. That is, one of a kind, unlike the cookie-cutter variety that popped up in cul-de-sacs to the delight of baby boomers. Pfeiffer told me millennials are rejecting that type of homogenous suburban culture and instead want something unique. She reminded me that millennials came of age in the blogging and Instagram era, so they want to show off a home that speaks to their individuality. But Pfeiffer warned me not to overemphasize preferences, whether it's for city living or amenities, when it comes to explaining the relatively low home ownership rate among millennials. As is often the case, she explained, it comes down to affordability. In the same vein, Laurie Goodman, co-director of the Urban Institute's Housing Finance Policy Center, told me, yes, millennials are drawn to big, expensive metropolitan areas because that aligns with their interests. But, she added, the modern economy pulls many millennials towards cities. That's where the jobs are. Unfortunately, that's not where the affordable housing is. Benjamin Keyes, an associate professor of real estate at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, told me that historically, every time a city added a job, it would usually add a corresponding unit of housing. But that 1-to-1 ratio has broken down in recent years. That's a function of scarce land in desirable locations like New York, San Francisco, and Miami, Keyes explained. He also pointed to restrictive zoning policies. Residents of the city tend to disdain new construction. It's noisy, disruptive, it might crowd their neighborhood or overpopulate their schools. So, locals tend to support policies designed to keep outsiders out. The outsiders, on the other hand, have no political representation in the places they seek to live, so it's a hard problem to solve. But President Trump recently introduced a plan to take zoning control out of the hands of local governments. Likewise, several 2020 Democratic candidates, including Cory Booker and Julián Castro, released proposals that would make zoning more inclusive. Yet, there are challenges beyond politics. For instance, constructing a new home is a fairly expensive undertaking. Keyes noted that tariffs don't help. They've raised the cost of common building materials like Canadian lumber and Chinese steel. And restrictive immigration policies, he added, can cut off cheap labor. He told me it's not a coincidence that the housing construction boom in the mid-2000s corresponded with an influx of immigrants. But now labor costs, in addition to materials and land, are more expensive, so builders are inclined to focus on the type of luxury units with high profit margins. Daryl Fairweather, the chief economist of the real estate company Redfin, told me entry-level homes, the type of homes young people traditionally buy, are therefore in short supply. So, unable to find an affordable home to purchase, many millennials are trapped in the rental market. Trapped, Fairweather explained, because the cost of rent is outpacing wage growth, meaning many millennials are devoting more and more of their paychecks towards rent. That makes it difficult to save for a down payment on a mortgage. The rental market, in turn, gets too crowded. Landlords, seizing on the basic principle of supply and demand, respond by pushing up rent even further. The vicious cycle spins and spins. And perhaps counterintuitively, the Urban Institute found that 25 to 34-year-olds who opt out of that vicious cycle by living with their parents are actually less likely to own a home in 10 years than their peers. Wait, I thought, don't you save money by bunking with mom and dad? Shouldn't that help you afford a mortgage sooner? But Goodman, who co-conducted that research for the Urban Institute, told me living at home is often correlated with low-wage work. In other words, those who depart the nest often do so in search of high-paying jobs. The comfort of living with family can perhaps stifle ambition. Surveys show that millennials are also a bit gun-shy when it comes to making big financial decisions like investing. This is part of the legacy of the Great Recession. Many of us entered the job market as unemployment plagued the country. We saw neighbors have their homes foreclosed on. No wonder then that we're not exactly enthusiastic about taking the home ownership plunge. Consider, Keyes told me that many millennials overestimate the amount of money you need to get a mortgage. He said the idea that you need a 20% down payment may seem like a rule of thumb, but you can actually get a mortgage with as little as 3.5% down via the FHA. Whoa, 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 I objected. Isn't that the type of loan that ruined the economy and set off this mess in the first place? Keyes assured me that the mortgage standards are a lot more stringent than they used to be. In fact, he told me they're probably too stringent, and that's also a reason why millennials have a low home ownership rate. He told me the requirement to show steady, stable employment is particularly tough for millennials who job hop or freelance. In total, according to analysis from the Urban Institute, lenders would have issued 6.3 million additional mortgages between 2009 and 2015 if lending standards had been more reasonable. We're not talking about the standards that got us into the recession, simply something a bit more moderate. Of course, it's also harder to qualify for a mortgage or save for one when you have student debt, a burden that millennials have in record numbers. Fairweather, citing analysis from a study conducted by Redfin, told me if Elizabeth Warren's student debt forgiveness plan is adopted, an aspiring homebuyer with the median amount of student debt would be able to buy a home in a U.S. metro area 3 years faster than if they were offered no debt relief. Now, taking a step back for a minute, there are two assumptions underlying this entire discussion that are worth examining. The first is that I'm talking about millennials as if they're a single thing. Yet, we are the most diverse and soon-to-be largest generation in history. Obviously, not all of us have the same housing experiences. Unfortunately, home ownership rates among blacks and Latinos have dropped more steeply than those of whites since the turn of the century. The second assumption is the idea that owning a home is good, that it's a smart decision. I asked each of the experts I spoke to if that was the case. They all told me that by and large, it was, with a couple of caveats. Fairweather told me that putting all your money into your house may not be a great idea. A diverse investment portfolio might be more beneficial. Pfeiffer told me if you're someone who desires flexibility, if you need to move a lot for your career, then maybe renting is the way to go. But Pfeiffer also pointed out that the most valuable thing most Americans own is their house. Not only is it their biggest asset, it's also their fastest growing in value. Fairweather, acknowledging that the 2008 financial crisis was an outlier, told me home ownership is generally recession-proof. Slipping into economic jargon, she added that owning a home is both a consumption and an investment good. That is, not only does it grow in value and enhance your wealth, but you also use it. Goodman told me a mortgage forces you to save money. That payment you send to the bank every month will be returned to you in the form of home equity. Plus, she added, you can lock in your mortgage payments for 30 years. That's not the case with rent, which inevitably rises. Given the financial rationale, I wondered if millennials' historically low home ownership rate is going to screw us in the future, and will that in turn force many of us to seek help from government safety nets, which will then strain the national budget. But the experts I interviewed all thought that millennials will buy homes in greater numbers at some point. Maybe not at the same rate as previous generations, but the gap will close eventually. As millennials have kids, as they reach middle age, Pfeiffer noted, their perspective on housing will change. Perhaps this will require us to reprioritize our preferences. Consider me. Born in New York City, I've always imagined I'd stay here until my dying days. But then I took a look around the housing market and wound up buying a place an hour and a half upstate. Luckily, a beer garden and a train station are just a short walk away. Okay, I'm gonna go live my life.